2 Kings 5:1 through 19. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a man important to his master and highly regarded because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man was a valiant warrior, but he had a skin disease. Aram had gone on raids and brought back from the land of Israel a young girl who served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, who could cure him of his skin disease." So Naaman went and told his master what the girl from the land of Israel had said. Therefore the king of Aram said, "Go, and I will send a letter with you to the king of Israel." So he went and took with him 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, and it read, "When this letter comes to you, note that I have sent you my servant Naaman for you to cure him of his skin disease." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and asked, "Am I God, killing and giving life, that this man expects me to cure a man of his skin disease? Recognize that he is only picking a fight with me." When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent a message to the king. Why have you torn your clothes? Have him come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. Then Elisha sent him a messenger who said, "Go wash 7 times in the Jordan, and your skin will be restored, and you will be clean." But Naaman got angry and left, saying, "I was telling myself, he will surely come out, stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand over the place and cure the skin disease. Aren't Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash them and be clean?" So he turned and left in rage. But his servants approached him and said to him, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more should you do it when he only tells you, 'Wash and be clean'?" So Naaman went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, according to the command of the man of God. Then his skin was restored and became like the skin of a small boy, and he was clean. Then Naaman and his whole company went back to the man of God, stood before him, and declared, "I know there's no God in the whole world except Israel. Therefore, please accept a gift from your servant." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives, in whose presence I stand, I will not accept it." Naaman urged him to accept it, but he refused. Naaman responded, "If not, please let your servant be given as much soil as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will no longer offer a burnt offering or a sacrifice to any other god but the Lord. However, in a particular matter, may the Lord pardon your servant. When my master, the king of Aram, goes into the temple of Rimmon to bow down in worship while he's leaning on my arm, and I have to bow in the temple of Rimmon, when I bow in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord pardon your servant in this matter." So he said to him, "Go in peace." This is the word of the Lord.
Good morning. I'm Phil, one of the pastors here at Christ Fellowship Eastside, and this morning in this story, we are going to see how people begin a relationship with God. Plain and simple, straightforward, and if you're wondering, what does this have to do with me? Good news is, I think this has to do with every single person in this room. And here's why. And I'll back up to give you a little backstory. I'm going to take you to my childhood years, the 1990s. And in the 1990s, and I have to realize that when I say those years, there are some who are sitting here who don't remember the glory of the 90s when everything had MSGs and dyes and all kinds of wonderful things. It was a wonderful era, lots of color, lots of joy. And one of the things that you saw everywhere was on the back of cars, there was a very popular bumper sticker. And I honestly, I totally scrapped the whole beginning of my sermon. So otherwise, I would have a slide up here for you that would show it to you. But most of you know what this is, the Coexist bumper sticker. You guys have seen that before, all the different symbols of different religions, all in one place, all one happy family, everybody getting along. And behind that idea was this message or this concept that all religions are basically equal. They're all going to the same place. They're all trying to achieve the same objective. And if we could just find a way to work together, it would be so much better. And we would all kind of get there together. And that was a popular message in the 1990s. And you know what? In fact, it stands out to me so much that it's almost a rarity that you ever see that bumper sticker ever again. Have you thought about that? Like, I hardly ever see that bumper sticker. Why? Why is that the case? Because there is a religious transformation that's happening in America. And in, probably I would even say, much of the West today. Don't believe me? The absence of the coexist bumper sticker. Don't believe me? Look at what happened following 9/11. Following 9/11, it put the myth, it helped people understand the myth that all religions are basically equal. That all religions are really going after the same thing. That we're all just, it's all one big happy family. And people started to question and say, like, I need something that'll give me hope in really dark and bleak times when the whole world as I know it has turned upside down. And so you had this moment there at the beginning of the 2000s where things began to shift, and the culture itself, churches started to get full again, and conversations around faith began to uptick again. But there was a problem that began to hit in the early 2000s, and that is that there was a cultural message that was running counter to all of that. And Christian churches began to have this really hard time with, like, what do we do with our ancient beliefs about what is true and right and good? And what do we do about things like those who would say that, marriage is not between one man and one woman for life? What do we do with that? What do we do with the fact that the culture is saying that a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man, and yet we have these beliefs that go all the way back to the very beginning of our Bibles, that God has created man and woman as different and good and sexed in his good design, his good plan for humanity. What do we do with that? And Christians didn't bow the knee to the shifting winds of the broader secular culture, and it left a lot of people wrestling with, what do I do with this? I'm looking for some hope. I'm looking for something to ground me, and Christians aren't cool with a lot of the things that I have come to embrace. And so you see a lot of deconstruction and a lot of different things happening during that era. And I would say over the last 20 years, what has happened is the shift has happened from a broader live and let live view of secularism, the coexist version of the 1990s, to over a 20-year span, you saw the formation of what I would call militant secularism. Militant secularism basically says, no, it's not just, hey, everybody's fine, you're all just taking your own paths to the top of the mountain. It's, no, there are certain paths that are objectively bad. And our secular culture has developed a particular creed and a certain way of defining who are the insiders and who are the outsiders. Who are the ones that have beliefs that are okay and palatable and acceptable, and who are the ones who have gone off the brink. And those are to be defined as hate speech, and those are to be defined as unhealthy and problematic, and we reject those and push away from those. It is in fact a different kind of secularism than the kind of secularism I grew up with as a child. But in that rise of militant secularism, there has been another rise and another shift in the last 3 to 5 years or so. And I've seen this uptick in the amount of conversations I'm having and other people I know are having with those who either have no faith at all, no background in Christianity, or maybe they had background as a young child, and now they're kind of putting some pieces together and exploring faith for the first time. Or maybe it was something they rejected as a teenager or as a college student. And now suddenly in their adulthood, they're beginning to revisit it. Why? Because of the rise of militant secularism expects people to have faith. If you've ever seen the houses, the sign in the front yard, "In this house we believe," and presents the secular creed. And it essentially is a faith statement that people are making about what they believe about gender, about race, about right to access abortions, about all of the various issues of our day. There are statements of faith that back that up, and those who do not align with that statement of faith are considered to be wrong, heretical. And so people are being presented with this very stark belief system that they either have to confess or reject. And those who are looking at that belief system and saying, I actually don't fit in that. Like, in order to confess that a man can become a woman or a woman can become a man, I'm having to confess something that is not real. It may exist in someone's mind, but I'm having to confess something that doesn't exist in the real space-time scientific fabric of the world that I know. I'm having to confess a lie to be true. I'm having to confess that men should marry men and women should marry women, and I have to confess that or I am a heretic. And so I have this problem with, like, this seems unnatural, this doesn't seem true, and yet I'm being told to believe it, to exercise faith in this. And I'm having a problem with that. And you have all these young men and women who are suddenly finding themselves out on the outs with the secular culture around them. There was a bridge that got built too far. And now they're untangling it all and saying, well, why do I believe that is unnatural? Why do I believe that this is not true? Why do I have those assumptions about how reality works and how gender and sexuality are supposed to be? Why do I believe that? And so they're going back and they're beginning to dig deep and they're asking these questions, questions that our secular culture has no answers for. Questions of where did I come from? Who am I? Where am I going? Questions of origin, meaning, destiny. Those kinds of questions are questions that the secular worldview can't answer. And so they're beginning to dig these things up. They're beginning to wrestle with them. And that's why I think a passage like this is just so incredibly important, because you are likely in one of two camps this morning. You're either one in the position of somebody who's asking those questions. And even if you're not fully committed to the quest of like trying to get answers, you are working on this. And you want to know, like, what is the Bible all about? What is the Christian view of these things? Because I'm not satisfied with the answers I'm being given, with the leap of faith I'm having to take in order to be not a heretic in my secular culture. But I'm also not okay with just accepting whatever my parents told me or whatever I heard in church growing up. I really want answers. Like, I want to investigate this stuff. I want to get this stuff right. Or you're in the situation of those who receive the questions. You're in the situation of those who are surrounded by those who are asking those questions, who are wondering, like, what is all this stuff about? And and people who do want to be pointed in some sort of direction, to get some kind of clarity in their lives. And that's effectively what's happening here in 2 Kings chapter 5. In this passage, we're going to see how this passage speaks to really both categories of us today, this morning. We're going to see, number one, what causes us to miss a relationship with God. Number two, what God uses to move us toward relationship with himself. And then three, what changes when we do have a relationship with God. Or maybe to put it another way, the inaccuracies of our assumptions about the relationship with God, the instruments God uses to move us, and the indicators that we do have a relationship with God. So first, the inaccuracies. What causes us to miss having a relationship with God? One of the key things about relationships that are really important is that relationships mean that I am no longer living my life on my own terms by themselves. Having a relationship means that I need to pursue someone else on their terms. I need to build a friendship, a relationship, a marriage, not on my terms, but on her terms. So guys, if you haven't figured that out yet, this is your moment. Just because it is your favorite movie, your favorite dinner location, your idea of a dream vacation, does not necessarily mean it is hers. In fact, what may be your favorite movie might be a horrible boredom for her. Or your favorite location to go out to eat may be totally off her list. Your idea of a dream vacation might be her worst nightmare. So begin to come to terms with that. Otherwise, this relationship ain't going to work. And we understand that with human relationships. Like, things are going to have to bend and flex if this is going to work. It works the same in marriages. It works the same in friendships. Like, we have to find some kind of way for this to work together. But for some reason, when it comes to how we approach God and our relationship with him, for some reason, all of that just goes out the window. And we start to operate on, well, how would I want this relationship to work? What do I think about how this relationship with God should function, and the back and forth and the dynamic of what he should expect from me, what he can't expect from me. And we begin to start drawing some lines on what we should expect. Here is one of these perfect situations where we see somebody who approaches God in the way that they think this relationship should function. This is how Naaman operates. And so through this, we see kind of 6 hurdles, 6 inaccuracies, 6 mistakes, things that keep people from really, truly coming to God, truly having a relationship with God, and having their lives changed and radically transformed as a result. The first thing we see in this passage is in verse 1, this great but moment. We see he's commander of the army, important to his master, highly regarded. Basically, all the celebrity status a guy can have. And then there's the great, but he had a skin disease. All of that, but this thing is in his life that he can't control. Though some of your translations may render that as leprosy. It's not exactly what we call leprosy today, or Hansen's disease. Probably some other skin condition or disease that may have been somewhat contagious and would cause some physical damage to someone's body, but carried with it a lot of stigma in the societies at large in the Middle East, where people wanted to avoid somebody who had this kind of condition. And it's a good representation of the kinds of chaos that enters into people's lives today. It has a lot of relationship to a severe medical diagnosis that you might experience. Some crazy thing comes into your life you were not expecting and sends you reeling. Or it could be like those situations where you find yourself on the outs with your friend group. You lose a deep and close relationship. Maybe those who have lost a spouse or those who've been through divorce. And you feel this sense of loneliness, this sense of trying to find yourself, this sense of maybe even being a pariah or just trying to ignore or numb the pain. People like Naaman prior to 2 Kings chapter 5 can go through their life perfectly peaceful, perfectly unexamined, without ever having to rethink anything, without ever having to question any assumptions about the way they live their life. And it's through the pain and it's through the crazy thing that comes at you that you weren't expecting that God is doing something in your life. And as weird and as crazy as it sounds, you'll never really have a relationship with God until you're able to welcome the crises that push you to him. God sends those crises to drive us back to himself as opportunities of transformation, just like Naaman. Number 2, we see the pride and prestige of this man. We see Naaman is the celebrity, national hero. Verse 18 even indicates this is someone who the king himself would go in and worship alongside probably some great politician in his country. The implication here is it really is hard to hear from God. It really is hard to pursue a relationship with God so long as you have everything together. So long as you feel like you've accomplished something. And you hear this, so it's crazy how this situation plays out. And you got to think about this, is he hears from this servant girl from this weak neighbor nation who explains the way that he can have his skin condition addressed. And she says, just go to the prophet. The prophet would take care of that. And so when Naaman then takes that instruction and he sits down with his friend the king and he says, hey, I've received this information that there's this prophet that can heal me. What is their response? Their response is not, hey, go to the prophet and get healed. Their response is, hey, let's get a bunch of money together. Let's write a letter to the king of Israel and let's pursue this. Let's get this to happen, something to change here. Because he's not really taking the advice of this lowly servant girl, because, I mean, what does she know anyways? I'm not going to go directly to the prophet she's talking about. That's beneath me. I'm going to go to the king. The king is on my level. The king is on my par and on my standing. I can't really accept what I'm being told at face value because of who it's coming from. We encounter similar circumstances like this. I'll give an analogy. I see this sometimes in the workplace, for example. You have employee number one, employee number two. They are at odds with each other. They've butted heads a number of times. Employee number two comes up with this really great workflow idea to solve some of their problems, to make things easier. Now, employee number one can adopt the idea of employee number two, and they basically have caved in and shown that employee number two is actually really smart and really good at their job and maybe somebody that I should listen to. Or they do one of two things. They either delay implementing it, or they modify in some way, shape, or form so that it doesn't really look like it came from employee number two. Because I can't bring myself to acknowledge that that person actually had something to say and that maybe I wasn't doing things properly. We see this in church, and I see this from my own heart, recognizing this. There have been times where I've been sitting under the preaching of God's word, and there is like conviction lights blaring in my soul. Do something about this. You need to change the way you're living. And I go, yeah, but if I act on that today, everybody will know that clearly that message got through to me and that there was, something big and bad in my life that I suddenly need to shift gears on. If I change something about that today, or if I change something about that on Monday and I start doing something wildly different, then that's going to communicate that I had something wrong about the way that I was living, and now suddenly everything's changed. What if I just kind of slowly ease this into the patterns of my life? So nobody really notices a big change here. And so it doesn't look like I've had some big transformation. We don't want to give people the satisfaction of knowing that we don't have it all together. This is the pride of Naaman. So confident in himself and the pride of how he lives and how he does his life that he can't hear the hard truths from those who aren't like him. I would press for us here, if someone isn't more educated than you, if they don't speak with the same accent as you, if they are not from the same socioeconomic status as you, beware of assuming they don't have much to offer. In fact, I would say if you're going to have a relationship with God, you have to stoop. You have to be willing to listen. It may be one of the children who are baptized and their experience that needs to speak into your soul. It may be one of the testimonies of a blue-collar member of our church. It may be one of those stories that comes from somebody who's not as educated as you. In fact, I might even go so far as to say, for some of us, that may be the requirement in order for you to walk with God. The requirement may be that I have to hear this message, the word of God, come from somebody I would totally never, ever in a million years want to listen to. How is it that they have grasp on what I can't figure out? But it bucks up against our sense of superiority. Superiority because of our background, our education, our race, our athleticism, our politics, our special status. And because of that, we rule that out and say, I can't hear from that person. Maybe if there was somebody a little more educated, maybe if there was somebody a little more like me, then I could, or somebody, not so white collars, maybe somebody a little more blue collar like me who's really experienced life or has been through the trauma that I've been through, then I could listen to them. That's pride talking. You got to come to the place of humility to hear that message from a servant girl in order to enter the kingdom. Number 3, possessions. In verse 5, it looks like Naaman, some commentators are like, this had to be access to the national treasury or something with the kind of wealth that this guy had. This is insane, the amount of gold and silver and clothes and all of these things. He has access to everything that he could possibly need or want to be able to live comfortably and then some. And even in his culture, it would have been a sign, hey, this is a guy who's in good standing with the gods. This is the kind of person that shouldn't have any kind of sickness enter his life because clearly he's done it all right and the gods are blessing him and he's in the right place. And I would just say, you won't have a relationship with God so long as you take your stuff as a sign of your spirituality. So long as you're looking to your possessions and is everything easy in life? Do I have everything I want and need? And that's how you gauge where you're at with God? You'll never have a relationship with God. In fact, your possessions and your collection will only be a distraction from a relationship with God. Because that's how Naaman thinks he can get in, is through his stuff. And taking a step further, and this kind of circles back to point number 2, is this idea of power. As Naaman goes to the king, what is operating in his head as he goes to that person who's equal in his eyes, equal standing with him? Naaman's assumption about how you approach God has to do with power of position. Because he's going, if I go to this kind of lesser king of Israel, who, by the way, I can beat if I need to, and we write a letter to him, bring some gifts and stuff, he's going to twist the arm of the prophet that's under him. And then that prophet has a special relationship with God, and so that prophet can twist the arm of God to then get me what I need. Because that's how this works, right? This is how the game is played. It's this transactional, manipulative kind of approach to God. If I pull the right levers, if I have the right positions and the right people who advocate for me and assist me with this, I can get what I want and what I need in life. If I can get in with God's people, if I can get a pastor who will vouch for me and pull some strings and do all the right things, then God will come through for me. God will do what I need him to do. But the amazing part of this story is as he comes, verse 9, and Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. Like all the power and prestige of that moment, the implication being, hey, if you don't deliver, this could go poorly for you. And verse 10, Elisha sent him a messenger. Like, what a move is that? Like, I'm not even going to talk to you. I'm going to send my aide out and you can talk to him about this situation that you got going on. I'm not even going to bother. The God of Israel doesn't play your power games. The God of Israel doesn't play with your strong arm methods to try to get him on your side. He doesn't even talk to him. And so it is with us. You'll never have a relationship with God until you're ready to abandon the manipulative games with God. I'm done playing around with this. You can try showing up with your chariots and your horsemen. You can try strutting into church and dressing up nice, cleaning up your act. But you'll never have that relationship with God so long as you're still trying to stack the odds in your favor. It has to require an abandonment of that. And then in verses 11 and 12, there are the plans of Naaman that all go away. His language in verse 11, he says, he got angry. He left saying, I was telling myself, he will surely come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the skin disease. He goes, I had in my mind how this was supposed to play out. I had a plan for I was going to do this, and the prophet was going to do that, and this is going to be better, and it's all going to be great. I had in my mind how this should work, and it didn't play out that way. It plays out very differently than the plans I had in my head. And in fact, he's told to do something totally not in his plan, something degrading and embarrassing. Something that would have really struck a nerve with him. It says, just go down to the Jordan and wash. Go down to the Jordan and wash. And it bucked up against his plans because he was not expecting something degrading. He was expecting something special. He talks about these rivers of his hometown that were much nicer, much cleaner. And he says, and I'm being told to go to the Jordan River. And for us, we have to recognize the Jordan for Israel was basically a dirty river that kind of just flowed down and helped keep the land and soil fertile, but it's not a beautiful, wonderful river of any sorts. We kind of imagine these things in our own minds. And Naaman assumes, like, if this is truly a God that can do these powerful things that my gods can't, then this has got to be a God of the finer things. Like, this has got to be a God who, my gods expect the nice stuff. What kind of God is this that expects you to stoop and go into a dirty river? This can't be right. This is not what I expected at all. This contradicts everything that I was thinking about how to get what I need from God. So again, you'll never have a relationship with God till you let go of your assumptions. Let go of your assumptions about this is how God is supposed to work. You sometimes operate on those assumptions based on, my parents told me certain things, or I picked up certain notions of how I think God wants to be talked to or addressed. And it results in these very respectable, meticulously crafted, carefully planned prayers to God. And what if that's not the way this God wants to be approached? What if that's not it at all? What if we've got in our heads an idea of what it looks like to have a relationship with God that's not actually true at all? But there's a God that has plans that are far different from our own. What if he's a God that can only be approached by those whose hearts are completely broken? What if this is a God that can only be approached by blubbering and authentic prayers? What if this is a God who can only be approached when our pretenses are dropped, when our inhibitions are overcome, and our hearts are completely humbled to the dust? What if? What if I have to embrace the embarrassment? Effectively, what Naaman's having to do in this moment is he's not just having to embrace the embarrassment of going into a difficult place and doing something different to approach God, but he's fundamentally having to say, the way that I was operating before, the way that I have been trying to approach God, the way I've been trying to gain his favor, totally wrong. It doesn't work. This God doesn't operate like this. And so I'm not just having to do the different thing. I'm not just having to approach him differently. I'm having to turn my back on the whole way I've been living my life, the whole way I've been trying to get God on my side, and I'm having to say no to that, abandoning all of those plans of how this should go. And I even have to abandon personal responsibility to make this right, to fix the thing. And this is the second aspect of what really strikes a nerve here with this go to the river and wash moment. And you see it come out in verse 13. One of his servants, his soldiers likely, turns and approaches him and says, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more should you do it when he only tells you, wash and be clean?" You see what this is getting at here? Like, Naaman came, again, in his head, saying, I'm ready. I'm ready to do whatever it takes to take care of this situation in my life. I'm ready to do a great feat for God. If you tell me to go fight a giant or to throw a ring into the fires of Mount Doom or to snipe a womp rat, I'm there. I'm ready to go. because I'm ready for the feat that's going to show that I deserve this healing from God. And then when he's told, hey, see that dirty river down there in the back where all the villagers and the peasants are taking their morning bath and cleaning their clothes? I want you to go down there with them, with the rest of us, and go dunk in there not just once or twice, 7 times. That's it. And he's going, that surely can't be what it takes, right? There's got to be more to it than this. You got to be hiding something from me. Just take a bath with the peasants and the farmers? You got to be kidding me. That's it. You'll never have a relationship with God so long as you want to share in the glory of your salvation. So long as you're thinking you've got to bring some heroic act to the table. So long as you're thinking, hey, I'm working on it. I'm trying to climb this ladder. I'm trying to climb that golden stairway to heaven. And I'll get there someday if I just put in the effort. If I got to have some of this that looks good on my part. But to go down there with everybody else, the peasants, the farmers, and to do what anybody could do is fall on their knees and go into the water. To have a relationship with God, you have to abandon your heroism. You have to let go of your main character energy. You have to see it shockingly as a free gift. Because a relationship with God truly is not a feat for the religious or for the successful or for the saints. It's a gift. It's a gift to the needy. It's a gift to anyone, the poorest of the poor, and actually, shockingly, the highest of the high. And this is fundamentally what we mean when we talk about this idea of the gospel. Gospel is just a Greek word that means good news. There is a good news that implies that we functionally live in a bad news state of mind, a state of living, of existence. That our lives are fundamentally like Naaman in his situation, as he's got this skin disease that's going to push him out from people and push him out of relationships, away from polite society, is going to wreck everything that he had built in his life. So it is that our relationship with God is such where we have this condition called sin. And that condition called sin separates us from God. God is holy. God can't look on sin. God can't have a relationship with those who have sinned. And so it pulls us out of fellowship with him. And in fact, we high-five that in the way that we live our lives. We live our lives without reference to him, without any regard to him, without giving thanks to him, and we just truck on our merry little way. And there is a beauty in this good news that God hasn't left us in that situation, that God has come for us to have a relationship with us. But like Naaman, you're going to have to stoop to receive it, because the relationship comes through a crucified Galilean construction worker. And it's awkward. It's embarrassing. It doesn't make any sense. It's not the way that we would have planned a relationship with God to work out. We would have planned us to do some great feat, us to be involved in a certain number of worship services, us to pray enough Hail Marys or whatever it is, and then we get in by the stuff that we do and the compounded interest of our investments with God. We would manufacture a system where we twist God's arm into letting us in, because then we would feel good about it. I contributed something to this. But only in the crazy plan of God is there a situation where God says, I don't want your stuff. I don't want your religious devotion. I don't want your Sunday morning gathering. I don't want your money. Stop it. I want you. I want a relationship with you. In order to get there, You have to let go of your pride. You have to get over your possessions. You have to release your power, abandon your plans, stop trying to take personal responsibility to get out of your situation. You got to let it all go. And that's when you finally come to that place where you finally have the relationship with God you always dreamed of. Where you find the Father you always craved. Where you discover the friend who'll never let you go. When you experience little by little, not all at once, but transformation in the deepest parts of your heart, things you thought could never even change about you, suddenly begin to change. Something is different here. Church, this is the good news of what Jesus has come to do. This is what you're looking for. This is what all your questions have been leading you to. This is what that moment, that experience of, I need something and I don't know what it is. This is what it's headed to, but it's not easy. It's not intuitive. It counters all of our assumptions. But I do want to leave us with two other points before we go. I'll be brief. Number one, or second point really, is the instruments that God uses to move us into relationship with himself. We looked on that from the negative standpoint of how Naaman responds to these people. But for those of us who have stooped at the cross of Christ, those who've come through the waters of baptism and said, not I, but Christ that lives in me. His death for my death, his life for my life. Those of us who've confessed that can see ourselves in this story. Because all throughout this story, we find these little examples of little people who made a big difference. Little people, like an enslaved child who makes a plea. The torn robes of the king, the command of the prophet, the awkwardness of the prophet's age, the counsel of a soldier. All of these people are people that move this story toward a beautiful end. And it's not because they had great names. In fact, in a lot of cases, the names aren't even mentioned to us. It's not because they had impressive theological vocabulary to tell people about who God is and what the gospel really is. We don't see a whole lot of that. It isn't some great insights or their status. Naaman had far more than that. What was it that's so powerful about these people, and especially the little servant girl at the beginning of the story? Is that she was willing to speak up. And that voice came from a heart of love and a heart of forgiveness for someone who had deeply, deeply wounded her and her family. She was able to see in her love for someone who was hurting, and instead of saying, he deserves it, let him lose his life. What does that matter to me? In fact, I'll celebrate the day he dies. She, out of her heart of love for that guy, says, if he would just go to the prophet, if he would just go to the Lord, he could be healed. Church, this is what it's going to take. Stop worrying about, am I going to stick my foot in my mouth and say the wrong thing? Stop worrying about the reputation or the image that you're trying to cultivate. And just say, am I willing to just be the servant girl who points in the right direction and says, go to the prophet. Go find Jesus. Kindly point people in the right direction. It's not about being proud or arrogant or trying to beat people over the head or try to assert my status over them, that I've got something figured out that you don't have. It's simply pointing to the one that's got all the answers. That's all you have to do. Want to be used by God? Point the way to God. Lastly, the indicators. What changes when people have a relationship with God? I want to call our attention to the very end of the story. 3 things that really change about Naaman. Number one, what he believes. He says, I know there's no God in the whole world except in Israel. He never could have gotten here if this was just simply held out as the truth. And I I reckon with this because I have conversations with people who go, there are certain things that I really struggle with about Christianity, certain doctrinal claims, certain truth claims. Like for Naaman, claiming that the God of this weak foreign neighbor country is the one true God, he ain't going to get there through logic. He ain't going to get there through math, through science. He has to get there through humility. He has to be broken. So long as he's up here and analyzing the truth claims about God from up here, can I math that? Can I logic that? Can I science that? He'll never get to a relationship with God. But once he gets humbled, those things that would have been unthinkable, unbelievable to him, suddenly become, no, that actually makes sense. I'm coming at it, instead of a hermeneutic of suspicion, I'm coming at it with a hermeneutic of trust. Use the language of the postmodern philosophers. Shifting how we believe. Something happens at the level of my thinking, of my belief, rejecting all of these alternatives, clinging to the one true God. This is what happens when God really gets a hold of someone's heart. Number two, how we give. One of the great indicators, and Jesus says this numerous times, so I'm not just trying to read this into the passage, but one of the great indicators of how someone whose life has been changed is what they do with their money, what they do with their stuff. And notice the shift here. He's gone from his entire approach to his wealth, his entire approach to his money has changed. At the beginning of the chapter, he's got all his stuff, and he's trying to use it to twist God's arm into doing something for him. But now he's going, please, what can I give? I just want to express my thanks to God for what he's done in my life. My entire approach to my money has completely changed. When you are changed by God, when you have a relationship with him, you stop seeing your stuff as a tool to manipulate God, and you start seeing it as an opportunity to show your gratefulness to God. You want to use it to help others. You want to use it to invest in those who are proclaiming the news that sets you free. You want to give, not to get, but because you've been given far more than you could ever possibly imagine. And then lastly, there's this little tidbit at the end it's so fascinating. The gospel really changes how we live in the day-to-day, in the murky grind of life. It's just so cool. He goes, hey, Elisha, I got this problem. I've got to go back to work. And things are really rough there. I've in the workplace that I go into, it's not a Christian workplace. I don't have a Christian boss. And things are really hard and difficult. And I've got to go into this pagan temple of all places, And so what do I do with this? What does Elisha not tell him? Elisha doesn't say, hey, I need you to move out of your country and come move here to Israel and live on a compound full of Christians. Okay? Come do that. No, he doesn't tell him to do that. He doesn't say, I want you to leave your job. I want you to go find a Christian boss and find a way so that you can, have this pristine workplace of people who believe just like you. Doesn't tell him to do that. Doesn't tell him, hey, I need you to cut all your ties with your non-Christian friends and just only hang out with church people, and that'll solve your problem. Doesn't tell him to do that. Instead, Naaman comes up with this creative solution of like, hey, I'm going to bring some of the dirt from the land of Israel. I'm going to basically dump that in the temple of our pagan gods. And so every time when I go and kneel in the temple, I'm kneeling in the dirt of Israel. What an incredible shift of humility that has taken for this guy to get to that place, where he's in his secular pagan work environment, kneeling in the dirt of the land of Israel and saying, I worship that God. He's like, does that work? Is that okay? And Elisha's like, go in peace. You good. Your heart, you're worshiping God in a really tough place. And I know some of you, Monday, you're going to be going into some environments where things are pagan, things are really difficult. And you're kneeling in the dirt of the foot of the cross and saying, I worship the one true God. I worship Jesus, and this is hard. And it's not easy. But the gospel really does change how you live, how you approach even the normal work environments that you enter, turning it from a place of rank paganism to a place where you can worship God and shine a light for him. This is what happens when we have a relationship with God, when you're finally ready to say, I'm done with the assumptions. I'm done with how I think this should work. I'm ready to come to him in the way he wants me to come.